The air in the grand ballroom of the Astoria crackled with the energy of 1,000 champagne flutes and $1 million in whispered deals. This was the night of the Croft Innovations Gala, the crowning social event of the year. But beneath the shimmering crystal chandeliers, a different kind of currency was being traded: reputation. And a beautiful, smug woman named Isabella Rossi was cashing in. She stood near the stage, a diamond necklace glittering on her throat, a gift from the man of the hour, telling anyone who would listen that she had won. She had won the man, the empire, the future, the defeated wife. An irrelevant ghost. But ghosts have a way of showing up when you least expect them. And in just a few moments, the entire room would learn that a queen never loses her throne. She simply waits for the perfect moment to reclaim it. Eleanor Vance Croft knew the exact shade of lipstick Isabella Rossi wore. It was called Victory Red. She knew because she'd found a tube of it in the glove compartment of her husband's Bentley, tucked away like a dirty little secret next to a spare pair of cufflinks. For 6 months, Eleanor had lived with the spectre of Victory Red. She saw it in her mind's eye, staining the collar of Julian's custom-tailored shirts, imagined its scent on his skin when he came home late, feigning exhaustion from board meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Julian Croft was not just a man. He was an institution. The charismatic CEO of Croft Innovations, a tech behemoth he had built from the ground up, with a little help from her family's initial seed investment, a fact he conveniently omitted in his many magazine interviews. To the world, they were the golden couple Julian the visionary tycoon, and Eleanor the elegant architect wife, with a pedigree as flawless as her bone structure. They lived in a sprawling Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, a gilded cage of Italian marble contemporary art and suffocating silence. The silence was the worst part. It had crept into their lives slowly, a fog that blurred the edges of their once vibrant love story. It started with cancelled dinner dates, then unanswered calls. Soon the silence was a third person in their marriage, vast and cold. Eleanor, a woman trained to see the structural integrity of things, saw the cracks forming in the foundation of her life long before anyone else. She confirmed her suspicions not with a private investigator, but with the cold, hard data she had access to as a signatory on their joint accounts. Flights to Santorini for 2 booked when Julian was supposed to be in Zurich. Charges from a boutique called L'Amour Fou for lingerie in a size that wasn't hers. And the necklace, the very same diamond lavalière Isabella was now flaunting at the gala, purchased from a private jeweler for a sum that could have funded a small startup. Eleanor didn't confront him. A storm of tears and accusations was what he would expect. It was what Isabella, with her dramatic, fiery personality, would have done. But Eleanor Vance was not Isabella Rossi. She was playing a different game, a longer game. Her pregnancy had confirmed that. 4 months along, she had told no one but her doctor. The tiny, fluttering life inside her was a secret she guarded with the ferocity of a dragon protecting its hoard. This child, the true heir to the Croft legacy, was not a bargaining chip. It was her reason to endure the whispers, the pitying looks from friends, the hollow ache in her chest. It was the reason she was now standing in the shadows of the Astoria's grand ballroom, watching the woman who had tried to ruin her life soak in a spotlight she hadn't earned. Her best friend Chloe materialized by her side, her expression a thundercloud of concern. "Are you okay, Elle? You don't have to be here. We can go." Eleanor offered a faint, serene smile, her hand resting instinctively over the slight curve of her stomach, hidden beneath the deep sapphire silk of her gown. "Oh no," she whispered, her eyes fixed on Isabella, who was now laughing, her head thrown back as she held court with a circle of fawning journalists. "I wouldn't miss this for the world. The show is just about to begin." Chloe looked from Eleanor's calm, determined face to the garish scene across the room. She didn't understand, but she trusted the quiet strength that had always been Eleanor's core. Julian was on stage now, a vision of corporate power in a bespoke tuxedo. He was giving his keynote address, his voice smooth and resonant as it filled the vast hall. He spoke of legacy, family, and integrity, words that dripped with a poison only Eleanor could taste. He thanked his board, his employees, and then with a brief, almost dismissive glance towards the back of the room, he said, "And of course my wife, Eleanor, for her unwavering support." A smattering of polite applause followed. From her vantage point, Eleanor could see Isabella preening her lips curved into a smug, triumphant smile. She believed that lukewarm acknowledgement was a public dismissal, a final clearing of the stage for her own grand entrance. She thought she was the star of the show. Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath. She had spent months planning this night, every detail as meticulously designed as one of her architectural blueprints. She had endured the pain, swallowed the betrayal, and channeled her heartbreak into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Isabella thought this was her coronation. She had no idea it was her execution. Isabella Rossi believed in destiny. She believed that some people were simply meant for greatness, for the spotlight, for a life adorned with diamonds and adoration. And she had never doubted, not for a single second, that she was one of those people. From her cramped apartment in Queens to a junior PR position at Croft Innovations, she had clawed her way up with a potent combination of ambition, ruthlessness, and an almost supernatural ability to be exactly what powerful men wanted her to be. With Julian Croft, she had been a breath of fresh air. Where Eleanor was quiet poise, Isabella was loud passion. Where Eleanor was classical music and art galleries, Isabella was yacht parties and impromptu trips to Monaco. She saw herself not as a home wrecker, but as a rescuer liberating a titan of industry from a dull, sterile marriage. "She's like a beautiful museum piece," she'd once told Julian, curled up against him in a hotel suite that cost more per night than her old monthly rent. "You're supposed to admire her, but you can't touch her. She's cold." Julian, caught in the intoxicating whirlwind of her youth and adoration, had simply nodded, letting her words paint a narrative that absolved him of his guilt. He needed to believe Eleanor was the problem, that their marriage was a hollow shell to justify the thrill he felt with Isabella. Isabella's campaign had been strategic. It began with accidental appearances at his regular lunch spots, then progressed to expertly timed emails with brilliant PR ideas late at night. She manufactured a crisis with a tech blogger that only she could fix, earning his gratitude and, more importantly, his attention. The affair that followed felt to her like an epic romance, a story that would one day be told with envy and admiration. Her jealousy of Eleanor was a ravenous, gnawing thing. It wasn't just about Julian. It was about everything Eleanor represented. The old money grace, the effortless class, the respect she commanded, without ever seeming to ask for it. Isabella studied photographs of Eleanor, mimicking her style, but adding a flashier, more modern twist. She bought the same brand of perfume, but wore twice as much. She wanted to erase Eleanor, to overwrite her, to become a better, brighter version of the woman Julian had married. In the weeks leading up to the Croft Innovations Gala, Isabella grew bolder. Her social media, once a curated stream of professional posts, began to feature cryptic hints of her new life. A photo of 2 champagne glasses with a Manhattan skyline view, captioned "To New Horizons." A shot of her hand adorned with a new diamond bracelet, resting on the leather interior of a luxury car, captioned, "Some drivers are better than others." Every post was a subtle poisoned dart, aimed directly at Eleanor. Tonight was to be her masterpiece. Julian had told her to be discreet, but Isabella had no intention of staying in the shadows. Discretion was for mistresses, and in her mind, she had already been promoted. She was the CEO-elect of his heart. She found her opening with Marcus Thorne, a well-known columnist for a major business journal. Positioning herself near him, she let out a sigh that was perfectly pitched between weary and blissful. "It's been such a whirlwind," she said, when he inevitably asked how she was enjoying the evening. She touched the diamond necklace, a gesture she had practiced in the mirror. "Julian is a force of nature. Keeping up with him is a full-time job." The implication was clear. Marcus, smelling a story, leaned in closer. "You two seem very close." Isabella gave him a smile that was both dazzling and conspiratorial. "Legacy isn't just about business, you know," she whispered, her eyes flicking towards Julian on the stage. "It's about the future. It's about finding a partner who shares your vision, your passion, your fire. Sometimes you have to burn down the old structure to build something magnificent and new." It was a direct quote, a perversion of something Eleanor had once said in an architectural magazine about historic preservation. The cruelty was the point. The columnist's eyebrows shot up. This was more than he could have hoped for. Buoyed by her success, Isabella moved through the crowd, a shark gliding through shimmering waters. She spoke to board members' wives, dropping Julian's name with an intimacy that bordered on possessive. She hinted at redecoration plans for the penthouse, a new summer home in the Hamptons. She was writing the story of her victory in real time, speaking it into existence. When Julian finished his speech, the applause was thunderous. He descended the stage, looking for all the world like a king returning to his court. His eyes met Isabella's across the room, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. To him, it was a gesture meant to placate her, to keep her happy for the night. To Isabella, it was a coronation. This was her moment. The official program called for a brief Q&A with the press, but Isabella saw an opportunity. She made her way to one of the floor microphones, her heart pounding with exhilaration. The room was buzzing. The energy was perfect. She felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. This was her stage now. She ignored the frantic warning look Julian shot her way. He was weak, she thought, afraid of the necessary unpleasantness of the transition. She would be strong for both of them. "Isabella Rossi from your own PR department," the moderator said, a little confused by her approach. "Actually," Isabella said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as strong, amplified throughout the grand hall, "I'm here to speak on a more personal note." A hush fell over the ballroom. This was not on the program. This was drama. "Julian just spoke about legacy." She began, her gaze locking with his. "And I believe a true legacy is built on truth and passion. It's about letting go of the past to embrace a brilliant, vibrant future." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, thick with insinuation. "I just want to say publicly how proud I am to be a part of that future. Julian and I believe..." But what she and Julian believed would be lost to the ages, because at that exact moment, the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung silently open. While Isabella was busy weaving her web of whispers and innuendo, Eleanor was orchestrating a war. Her strategy sessions didn't take place in tearful phone calls with friends, but in the sterile, soundproofed conference room of Davies, Thorne and Associates, a law firm known for handling the most brutal corporate and divorce battles in the city. Davies was a man in his late 60s, with eyes that had seen every form of human treachery. When Eleanor had first walked into his office 2 months prior, he had expected a standard case, a wealthy, heartbroken wife seeking a punitive settlement. What he got was a cold, calculating CEO in the making. "I don't want to ruin Julian," she had stated in their first meeting, her voice devoid of emotion. "I want to acquire him, his company, his legacy, everything he thinks he's taking from me to give to her." The plan she laid out was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Mr. Davies, a man not easily impressed, had leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. This was the kind of case that made legends. Eleanor's first move was forensic accounting. She didn't just want proof of the affair. She wanted proof of his misuse of corporate assets. Working with a team of accountants Davies provided, she meticulously traced the financial bleed. The consulting fees paid to a shell corporation that traced back to Isabella. The company jet being used for romantic getaways under the guise of investor meetings. The lavish gifts, including the diamond necklace, all funneled through unaudited expense accounts. It was a pattern of reckless, arrogant embezzlement. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a breach of his fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders. Her second move was leveraging her own power. The little help her family had provided to start Croft Innovations wasn't so little. The Vance Trust held a 17% stake in the company, making her the largest single shareholder outside of Julian himself. For years, she had given him her proxy vote, a silent, trusting partner. No more. She began making quiet, discreet calls. She started with Amelia Hart, a board member who had been with the company since the beginning and had privately expressed concerns about Julian's increasingly erratic behavior and lavish spending. Eleanor didn't approach her with gossip about an affair. She approached her as a fellow major investor, laying out the cold, hard data of the financial misuse. She showed her the flight manifests, the fraudulent invoices, the offshore accounts. "He's compromised Amelia," Eleanor had said, her voice calm and steady over the phone. "His personal recklessness is now a direct threat to the stability of this company, to our investment." Amelia, a shrewd businesswoman, was horrified and impressed. She pledged her support and the support of the shareholders she represented. Eleanor moved on to the next name on her list, and the next. She collected proxy votes like a general gathering troops, building a silent army within Julian's own ranks. Many were investors who felt ignored by Julian's flashy new money style and yearned for the steady, principled leadership that Eleanor's family name Vance represented. The final, most crucial piece of her plan was the corporate bylaws, a document she had read until she knew it by heart. Tucked away in Section 9, Article 4, was a morality clause, a relic of a more puritanical era, but still legally binding. It stated that the CEO could be subject to immediate removal by a majority vote of the board and shareholders for any action that brought public scandal, disrepute, or ridicule to the Croft Innovations brand. Julian, in his arrogance, had likely forgotten it even existed. Isabella, in her public boasting, was about to trigger it like a tripwire. The day of the gala, Eleanor spent the morning not at a spa, but back in Mr. Davies's office. The dossier was complete. It was a thick, heavy binder filled with bank statements, sworn affidavits from disgruntled former employees, and high-resolution photographs of Julian and Isabella in various exotic locales, all taken by a discreet security firm. On top of the binder lay a single signed document, an emergency petition to call a shareholder vote, citing Section 9, Article 4. "Are you ready for this, Eleanor?" Mr. Davies asked, his tone unusually gentle. Eleanor looked down at the documents, the culmination of months of silent, meticulous work. She felt a profound and heavy calm. The grief was still there, a cold stone in her heart, but it was now surrounded by a fortress of purpose. She wasn't just a scorned wife. She was a protector of the legacy she had helped build, and a protector of the child who would one day inherit it. "He chose the stage," she said, her voice firm. "I'm just writing the final act." She left the law firm and went home to the silent, empty penthouse. She stood before her full-length mirror, looking at the woman staring back. The last 6 months had etched new lines of strength around her eyes. She placed both hands on her belly, where a gentle flutter reminded her of what was at stake. "It's just you and me now," she whispered to the child. "Let's go show them what a legacy really looks like." She chose the sapphire gown, not just for its beauty, but for its symbolism. It was the color of royalty, of depth of ice. When she walked into that ballroom, she would not be a victim. She would be a queen, arriving to restore order to her kingdom. And as she heard Isabella's voice begin to echo through the hall, she knew her moment had arrived. The storm she had gathered was about to break. From his position on the stage, Julian Croft felt the familiar, intoxicating surge of power. The applause washed over him, a physical manifestation of his success. The room was filled with the most influential people in the city, and they were all here for him. He was the sun, and they were the planets orbiting in his golden glow. His speech had been a triumph. He'd hit all the right notes, innovation growth, a nod to the future. He'd even managed the perfunctory mention of Eleanor without his voice catching. For a fleeting moment, a sliver of guilt had pricked him. The memory of the intelligent, vibrant woman he had once loved. The woman who had stood by him when Croft Innovations was nothing more than a dream sketched on a napkin. But he'd pushed it down, burying it under the more exciting, more immediate thrill that Isabella provided. He saw her across the room, resplendent in red, the diamond necklace he'd bought her sparkling like a captured star. She was bold, beautiful, and a little reckless, and he loved it. She made him feel young again, breaking the staid, predictable rhythm of his life with Eleanor. He knew he should have been more careful, but his arrogance had grown in lockstep with his company's stock price. He felt invincible above the petty rules of morality that governed lesser men. He saw her approach the microphone, and his blood ran cold for a second. "What is she doing?" He shot her a warning glare, a sharp, angry narrowing of his eyes. This was not the plan. The plan was a quiet, civilized divorce, in a few months, a carefully managed PR statement, and a gradual introduction of Isabella as his new partner. It was supposed to be clean, controlled on his terms. But as she began to speak, a part of him felt a perverse thrill. Look at her, so fearless, claiming him in front of everyone. It was a testament to his power that a woman like this would risk everything for him. His fear was quickly replaced by a wave of ego. Let them whisper. Let them stare. Soon enough, everyone would know. Perhaps a public spectacle was better, a clean break, instead of a slow, managed bleed. He was Julian Croft. He could survive a scandal. He might even profit from it. His mother, Catherine Croft, was seated at the head table just below the stage, a formidable matriarch with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe chignon. She was the embodiment of old-world decorum and pragmatism. Her face was an unreadable mask of stone, but Julian knew she was seething. Catherine cared about two things above all else: the family name and the company's bottom line. A messy public affair threatened both. Julian made a mental note to smooth things over with her, later promising that this was all part of a larger, brilliant plan. He tuned back into Isabella's words, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Embrace a brilliant, vibrant future," she was saying. It was almost poetic. This was the story he would tell the world. His first marriage had been a comfortable, stable foundation, but his future required a different kind of partner, one with fire. Then the world tilted on its axis. The opening of the ballroom doors was not a dramatic, crashing event. It was a silent, sweeping motion, as if the doors themselves were bowing to the woman who passed through them. Eleanor. It took Julian's brain a moment to process what he was seeing. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had declined the invitation weeks ago, citing a headache. He had been relieved. Her presence would have been an awkward complication. But this was not the quiet, retreating Eleanor he had been living with for the past year. This woman was a different creature entirely, dressed in a column of sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light from the room. She moved with a grace and purpose that was nothing short of regal. She didn't look angry. She didn't look heartbroken. She looked powerful. And then he saw it, the subtle but unmistakable curve of her abdomen, a shape that the flowing fabric of her gown could no longer completely conceal. Pregnant. The word exploded in his mind, a silent, devastating bomb. Pregnant how? When he did a frantic calculation in his head. It had been months since He had been so careful, so distant. His mind reeled a maelstrom of confusion, shock, and a sudden, terrifying dread. The entire ballroom had fallen into a pin-drop silence. Isabella, mid-sentence, had frozen at the microphone, her mouth slightly agape, the triumphant words dying on her lips. All eyes, hundreds of them, were fixed on Eleanor as she glided through the parted crowd, which seemed to instinctively move aside for her, as if for royalty. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the stage, her expression serene, her chin held high. She looked like a queen about to address her court after a long and trying war. Julian felt a primal fear he hadn't experienced since he was a young man, risking everything on a single desperate business loan. He had grossly, catastrophically underestimated her. He had mistaken her silence for weakness, her stillness for surrender. He had been living in a king's delusion, believing he controlled the board, the narrative, and the women in his life. He realized now, with a clarity that was both ice-cold and burning hot, that while he had been playing checkers, Eleanor had been playing chess. And as she reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage, he had the sickening feeling that she had just said one word: checkmate. Isabella felt the power of the microphone in her hand, like a scepter. The silence of the room was her symphony, and she was the conductor. Every eye was on her. She had Julian's attention, the media's attention, the entire New York high society's attention. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the culmination of all her planning and seduction. "Julian and I believe," she repeated, her voice ringing with confidence, "that a company's soul is a reflection of its leadership. It must be honest, bold, and forward-looking." She glanced at Julian, expecting to see admiration, perhaps a touch of loving exasperation at her boldness. Instead, she saw a flicker of raw panic in his eyes. He was looking past her towards the back of the ballroom. A frown creased Isabella's perfect brow. She had his attention. Why was he looking away? Then a collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a sound like the tide being suddenly pulled from the shore. The whispers that had been buzzing all night ceased, replaced by a profound, unnerving quiet. The sea of elegantly dressed guests parted, creating a wide aisle from the main entrance straight to the stage. And walking down that aisle was Eleanor Croft. Isabella's first reaction was a jolt of fury. How dare she? How dare this ghost of a woman show up here tonight of all nights to try and spoil her moment? But the fury was quickly extinguished by a cold wave of disbelief. Eleanor looked different, transformed. There was a luminous quality to her skin, an unshakable poise in her posture. She wasn't the sad, defeated wife Isabella had imagined her to be crying into a pillow in that cold, empty penthouse. This was someone else. Then Isabella's eyes, like Julian's, fell on the gentle swell of Eleanor's abdomen. Pregnant. The word hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Julian had assured her his marriage was a formality, a sterile, loveless contract. A child and heir was never part of the equation. This changed everything. A mistress with a billionaire was a scandalous headline. But a wife with the billionaire's legitimate heir, that was a dynasty. Her boast just seconds before, so powerful and bold, now hung in the air, sounding cheap, desperate, and foolish. The faces in the crowd that had been looking at her with fawning curiosity were now turning towards Eleanor with something else entirely: respect, intrigue, and a dawning understanding. Eleanor walked not with haste, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace. She didn't look at Isabella. She didn't even seem to register her existence. Her eyes were fixed on a point just beyond the stage, as if looking towards a future Isabella could not see. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, weighted silence, thick with shattered illusions and the promise of a reckoning. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the soft music from the orchestra. All of it had vanished, sucked into the vacuum created by Eleanor's presence. One could have heard a diamond drop. Isabella stood frozen, the microphone still clutched in her hand, suddenly feeling garish and exposed. Her victory-red lipstick felt like a clown's smear. Her borrowed diamonds felt like glass. The narrative she had so carefully constructed, the story of her epic love and inevitable triumph, was disintegrating in real time. She was no longer the exciting future. She was a tawdry, temporary distraction. Julian on stage seemed to shrink. The powerful, charismatic CEO was gone, replaced by a man trapped in a spotlight. His face pale, his eyes darting between the two women, his past and his future, colliding right before him. Eleanor reached the foot of the stage. She paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the front row, lingering for a fraction of a second on Julian's mother, Catherine Croft. The old woman's face was as impassive as ever, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were locked on Eleanor. And for the first time that night, they held a flicker of something other than disapproval. It looked like calculation. With the grace of a dancer, Eleanor ascended the 3 short steps onto the stage. She walked directly towards the main podium, where Julian had given his keynote address just minutes earlier. She moved as if she owned the stage, as if she had been born to stand there. She stopped at the podium, placing her hands lightly on its sides. She still hadn't looked at Julian or Isabella. She looked out at the silent, captive audience. She took a single deep breath, as if to center herself, and then she began to speak. Her voice, unlike Isabella's, was not loud or theatrical. It was quiet, clear, and resonant, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. And every single word landed with the devastating force of a precision strike. "Good evening," Eleanor Croft said, her voice as calm as a frozen lake. My husband, Julian, spoke tonight about legacy. I'm here to talk about it too. A legacy. Eleanor continued, her voice holding the entire room in a state of suspended animation. Isn't just about stock prices and market caps. It isn't something you can acquire or steal. A legacy is built. It's built on integrity, on sacrifice, and on truth. It is carried in the blood, and it is nurtured for the future. She paused, letting her hand drift down from the podium to rest for the first time publicly on the gentle curve of her stomach. And our future, the future of the Croft legacy, is right here. A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. It was one thing to see it. It was another to have it confirmed. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an announcement, an anointing. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone, his face a ghastly shade of white. Isabella, still standing awkwardly by the floor microphone, seemed to physically deflate, the arrogant fire in her eyes, sputtering out, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Eleanor's eyes finally moved to her husband. There was no fire in her gaze, no hatred, only a profound and chilling disappointment. My husband also spoke of family and the importance of a strong partnership. I couldn't agree more, which is why it is so deeply regrettable when the funds meant to secure a company's future are instead used to finance a cheap and tawdry affair. The word cheap was delivered with such surgical precision that several people in the front row actually flinched. Isabella turned a shade of scarlet that clashed horribly with her dress. I speak, Eleanor said, turning her attention back to the audience, of over $2 million in embezzled corporate funds. Funds funneled through a shell LLC named IR Creative Solutions. I believe the IR stands for Isabella Rossi. Funds used for private jets to Santorini, for suites at the Hotel de Paris, Monte Carlo, for designer clothes, and for this. As she spoke, the massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the Croft Innovations logo, flickered to life. It was not a PowerPoint presentation. It was a bank statement. A page from a corporate American Express account, with line items and dates and amounts, all highlighted in yellow. Santorini Villa Rental, $50,000. L'Amour Fou Boutique, $22,000. Bastion. Private Jewelers, $250,000. The final charge was dated just 6 weeks ago. It was for the necklace Isabella was currently wearing. Isabella's hand flew to her throat, as if the diamonds were suddenly burning her skin. The screen changed again, showing a flight manifest for a Croft Innovations private jet with 2 passengers listed Julian Croft and Isabella Rossi. It changed again, a copy of the LLC registration for IR Creative Solutions, signed by Isabella herself. This was no mere accusation. This was an indictment presented with the cold, irrefutable finality of a prosecutor's closing argument. This is not just a personal betrayal. Eleanor's voice cut through the stunned silence. It is a betrayal of every shareholder, every employee, every person who has put their trust in this company. It is a gross violation of a CEO's fiduciary duty. She picked up a sleek leather-bound folder from the podium, which had been placed there earlier by a trusted associate. Which brings me to the Croft Innovations corporate bylaws, specifically Section 9, Article 4, the Morality Clause. A low murmur spread through the room. The board members present knew exactly what she was referring to. It states that any action by the CEO that brings public scandal, disrepute, or ridicule to the company is ground for immediate removal by a majority shareholder vote. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of Amelia Hart, then two other senior board members she had spent weeks courting. She saw their grim, determined nods. Her silent army was ready. Ms. Rossi's little performance here tonight was most helpful, Eleanor said with a touch of ice. She provided the public scandal. She patted the folder, will provide the majority vote. The Vance Trust, combined with the proxies I have secured from other concerned shareholders, now represents 54% of the voting power of this company. 54%. The number landed like a death knell. She had control. Julian finally moved. He took a staggering step forward, his hand outstretched. Eleanor, don't. We can talk about this. Privately. His voice was a hoarse, desperate croak. Eleanor looked at him. Truly. Looked at him, and for the first time all he saw was a stranger. The time for private talks is over, Julian. You made this public. She turned her back on him, a gesture of finality more brutal than any slap. Then the moment happened. The moment that would be recounted in society circles and boardrooms for decades to come. Catherine Croft, Julian's mother, rose from her seat at the head table, her face a mask of aristocratic stoicism all evening had finally cracked. But it wasn't with anger at Eleanor. It was with a cold reptilian fury directed at her own son. He had not just embarrassed the family. He had threatened the empire. He had been weak, foolish, and sloppy. Eleanor, on the other hand, had been strong, strategic, and brilliant. She hadn't come to destroy Croft Innovations. She had come to save it from the rot within. She was protecting the legacy, the name, the fortune. She was protecting the future, who was now her unborn grandchild. Catherine walked slowly, deliberately to the foot of the stage. She did not ascend it. Instead, she stopped directly in front of Eleanor, who turned to face her. The two most powerful women in the room held each other's gaze. Then, in a gesture of breathtaking feudal power, Catherine Croft, the matriarch of the dynasty, inclined her head and gave a short, sharp, formal bow from the waist. It was not a gesture of subservience. It was an act of fealty, an acknowledgement of a shift in power, a public transfer of allegiance from the disgraced king to the ascendant queen. That was the signal. Amelia Hart rose, followed by her husband. Another board member, a powerful venture capitalist, stood and inclined his head. Then another and another. Across the ballroom, shareholders, investors, and key stakeholders, who understood where the power now lay, began to rise. Some inclined their heads. Others, seeking to make their allegiance clear, bent a knee slightly in a gesture of profound respect and self-preservation. They weren't just kneeling to Eleanor. They were kneeling to the new center of gravity, to the 54%, to the mother of the heir, to the woman who had just saved their investments from the whims of a fool. The sight was staggering, a wave of deference, a mass genuflection of the 1%. And standing alone, utterly abandoned, were two people. Julian frozen on the stage, his empire crumbling around him, and Isabella, by the microphone, a pariah in a red dress and stolen diamonds, her face a mask of utter soul-crushing humiliation. She had boasted that she had won. But as she watched the entire world kneel before the pregnant wife she had dismissed as a ghost, Isabella Rossi finally understood that she had never even been in the game. The silence that followed Eleanor's final pronouncement was a physical entity, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered all sound in the grand ballroom. The image of the city's elite, its titans of industry and finance, bowing and kneeling before the pregnant, sapphire-clad woman on the stage, was an image that would be seared into the collective memory of New York society. It was a seismic shift of power executed with the terrifying grace of an avalanche. The first to move was Mr. Davies Eleanor's lawyer, who had been standing discreetly near the side entrance. He glided through the petrified crowd and ascended the stage, standing a respectful pace behind Eleanor, a silent guard at the gates of the new regime. The spell was broken. People began to breathe again, to whisper, to slowly, awkwardly rise to their feet, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and giddy excitement at having witnessed such a legendary takedown. Julian, who had been frozen in a tableau of pathetic disbelief, finally shuddered back to life. His eyes, wild and desperate, darted around the room, searching for an ally. A friendly face, a single person who wasn't looking at him with pity or contempt. He found none. He turned to his mother, Catherine, who was now standing erect at the foot of the stage, her expression as hard and unforgiving as granite. "Mother!" He rasped the word, tearing at his throat. "You can't let her do this." Catherine Croft looked up, not at her son's face, but at his chest, as if she were inspecting a disappointing piece of merchandise. "She isn't doing anything, Julian," she said, her voice carrying in the renewed quiet of the room. She is fixing the mess you made. You took our name, our legacy, and you used it as a napkin to wipe your mouth after a cheap meal. You are a fool, and fools do not sit at the head of this family or this company." Each word was a perfectly polished stone, hurled with deadly accuracy. She turned her back on him and addressed one of the family's private security guards with a simple, brutal command. "See that Mr. Croft gets home. His access to the corporate accounts and transport is to be revoked at midnight." Meanwhile, Isabella Rossi was attempting an escape. Her face was a grotesque mask of smeared makeup and panicked tears. The diamonds on her neck felt like a hangman's noose. She stumbled off the stage, avoiding the podium where Eleanor stood, a picture of serene control. Isabella tried to melt into the crowd, but it was like trying to hide in a hall of mirrors. Everyone saw her. Everyone stared. She saw a woman she'd had cocktails with just a week ago. Patricia Bainbridge, and made a desperate move towards her. "Patricia," she whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand. Patricia looked at Isabella's hand as if it were a diseased thing, took a deliberate step back, and turned to her husband. "Darling," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "I suddenly feel quite ill. This whole affair is just so dreadfully common." The public shunning was absolute. Isabella fled a pariah trailed by a wake of contemptuous whispers, her high heels clattering on the marble floor in a frantic, undignified rhythm, marking the end of her short, tragic reign. Eleanor remained on the stage. She did not rush to leave. She spoke in low, calm tones with Amelia Hart and the other board members who had joined her. She was not gloating. She was governing. She was already scheduling the emergency board meeting for 8 o'clock the following morning. She moved and spoke with the innate authority of someone who had always known how to lead, but had simply been waiting for the moment to take command. As she finally descended the stage, the crowd parted for her once more, a sea of respectful silence. Her victory was not loud or explosive. It was a profound, world-altering quiet. The emergency board meeting took place in the main conference room on the 50th floor of the Croft Innovations Tower. The long mahogany table, usually a stage for Julian's boisterous monologues, felt like a funeral slab. Julian was there as legally required, seated at the far end of the table from the chairman's seat. He was flanked by a high-priced lawyer who looked profoundly uncomfortable. Julian himself looked like a ghost. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were sunken, and a tremor ran through his hands. Eleanor entered precisely at 8:00 a.m. with Mr. Davies at her side. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored grey dress. She did not take the chairman's seat at the head of the table. She took a seat directly in the center, the new locus of power. She nodded to the assembled board members, her gaze cool and professional. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "We all know why we're here. The events of last night have necessitated this meeting. Pursuant to Section 9, Article 4 of the Corporate Bylaws, I am formally calling for a vote of no confidence in Julian Croft as CEO and Chairman of the Board due to actions that have caused significant and material damage to the reputation and stability of this corporation." She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The evidence compiled in neat folders in front of each board member spoke for itself. Financials affidavits. The story splashed across the front page of every major newspaper in the country. "I second the motion," Catherine Croft said from her seat, her voice like cracking ice. The vote was a formality, a swift and bloodless execution. One by one, the ayes came firm and resolute. A few of Julian's remaining loyalists, seeing the utter futility of dissent, quietly abstained. The motion passed. A corporate secretary placed the resignation papers in front of Julian. His hand shook so violently he could barely hold the pen. He looked up, his eyes finally landing on Eleanor, pleading. He saw no flicker of pity, no residue of the love they once shared. He saw only the cool, dispassionate gaze of his replacement. He signed his name, the ink scratching against the paper, the only sound in the room. The final humiliation came minutes later. As he was packing the few personal items from his desk into a cardboard box, a framed photo of them in happier times, a silver pen, set a foolish little trophy from a charity golf tournament. The head of corporate security appeared at his door. "Mr. Croft," the man said, his tone respectful but firm, "will escort you from the building." The walk from his office to the elevator past the desks of employees who studiously avoided his gaze was the longest of his life. He was no longer Julian Croft, the Titan. He was just a man with a box of pariah in the kingdom he had built. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor worked with a relentless, focused energy. Her first act as interim CEO was to hold an all-hands meeting. Standing before the company's 1,000 employees, she was candid and direct. "There will be a new era at Croft Innovations," she announced. "An era of transparency, accountability, and integrity. We will no longer be a company driven by ego, but by innovation. We will no longer value flash over substance. Our work will speak for itself. Your work will be valued. Your contributions will be recognized." The speech sent a shockwave of relief and renewed purpose through the company. The toxic, sycophantic culture Julian had fostered began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of collaborative energy. Eleanor promoted Amelia Hart to Chief Operating Officer and began elevating other competent executives who had been sidelined by Julian's cronyism. Her nights were spent in the penthouse, which she was slowly transforming. The cold, minimalist art Julian had favored was replaced with warmer, more personal pieces. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. Chloe would come over, and they would sit and talk for hours. Not about the past, but about the future. "I still can't believe it," Chloe said one evening, watching Eleanor sketch out ideas for a new childcare facility on the Croft campus. "You didn't just leave him. You dismantled him." Eleanor smiled faintly, her hand resting on her growing belly. "I didn't want his money, Chloe. I wanted his power. Not for me, but for this." She patted her stomach. He was going to squander it on shallow things and shallow people. This legacy, the one my family helped start, deserved better. My child deserves better. The legal and financial fallout for the vanquished continued. The civil suit against Isabella Rossi resulted in a summary judgment in Croft Innovations' favor. Unable to pay, she filed for bankruptcy. Paparazzi caught a photo of her working as a hostess at a mid-range restaurant in New Jersey, her face pale and anonymous, the victory red lipstick gone forever. She had become a footnote in someone else's epic. 5 months after the gala, Eleanor gave birth to Alistair Vance Croft. Holding her son for the first time, Eleanor felt a profound sense of completion. Every difficult choice, every sleepless night, every moment of pain had led to this perfect, tiny being in her arms. He was not the product of a broken marriage. He was the reason for a new beginning. Catherine Croft sent an exquisite antique silver rattle with a simple handwritten note, "For the heir." It was not a grandmother's loving gift. It was a monarch's acknowledgement of the line of succession. Eleanor integrated motherhood and her role as CEO seamlessly. Alistair became a beloved fixture at the office, and her ability to command a boardroom while simultaneously knowing her son's feeding schedule became legendary. She proved that strength and compassion were not mutually exclusive. One afternoon, a year after that fateful night, Eleanor stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her office. On her desk lay the blueprints for a new research and development campus. She had designed herself a beautiful, innovative space that merged cutting-edge technology with sustainable architecture. It was the perfect fusion of her two worlds. Alistair, now a babbling, curious toddler, played on a soft rug at her feet. She looked down at him, then out at the sprawling city below. The view was the same, but her perspective had changed entirely. It was no longer a gilded cage, but a kingdom of possibilities. A gossip site had recently published a blurry photo of Julian looking paunchy and lost on a beach somewhere, with a headline that called him the Forgotten Tycoon. Eleanor felt nothing. He was a ghost from a different lifetime. She knelt down and pulled Alistair into her arms, holding him close. He smelled of milk and innocence, and the boundless promise of the future. The scar on her heart from Julian's betrayal remained, but it no longer ached. It was a reminder like the structural lines on a blueprint, showing where the original design had failed, and where a stronger, more resilient foundation had been built in its place. She had lost a husband, but she had found her purpose. She had secured her legacy not by marriage, but by merit. She was Eleanor Vance Architect and CEO Mother and Queen. And as the sun set over her city, casting long shadows that looked like roads leading to the horizon, she knew her greatest work was just beginning. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about loud boasts or public declarations, but about meticulous planning, unwavering resolve, and the courage to act when the time is right. She turned her deepest pain into her greatest weapon, not for simple revenge, but to protect her legacy and build a better future for her child. She didn't just win a battle against a cheating husband and his mistress. She won control of her narrative, her company, and her life. If you were moved by Eleanor's incredible journey from a gilded cage to a well-earned throne, please take a moment to show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed the story, and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of justice, empowerment, and unforgettable drama. Thank you for listening.